In the quiet farmlands outside LaPorte, Indiana, lies a place forever stained by unimaginable horror. Known chillingly as the Murder Farm, it was the domain of Belle Gunness, a name whispered alongside history's most monstrous figures. By the early 20th century, this seemingly ordinary pig farm had become a graveyard, concealing the remains of dozens of victims lured to their deaths by one of America's most prolific and brutal female serial killers. She acquired terrifying nicknames that hinted at the darkness within: Hell's Belle, Lady Bluebeard, the Mistress of Murder Farm. These weren't mere sensational labels. They were frantic attempts by a shocked society and press to comprehend the sheer scale and nature of her atrocities. How could a woman, particularly in that era, perpetrate such calculated, gruesome violence, often involving dismemberment, acts typically associated with male killers? The names reflected a struggle to categorize a figure so profoundly transgressive, blending fear, morbid fascination, and perhaps an underlying discomfort with a woman embodying such extreme evil. Estimates suggest Belle Gunness murdered upwards of 40 people, men, women, and children, primarily for financial gain. Her method often involved placing personal ads in newspapers, enticing lonely men with promises of marriage and security, only to poison, bludgeon, and bury them after securing their life savings. Yet, beyond the confirmed carnage, the greatest enigma remains. Did Belle Gunness perish in the flames that consumed her farmhouse in April 1908? Or did this cunning killer orchestrate her own fiery disappearance, vanishing into legend? Join us as we delve into the life, crimes, and enduring mystery of the Indiana ogress. From Norway to nightmare, the making of a killer. The woman who would become Belle Gunness entered the world as Brynhild Paulstatter Sturseth on November 11, 1859, in the small community of Selbu, Norway. Born the youngest of 8 children to Paul and Berit Sturseth, her family lived a modest life as tenants on a small farm. Her father was reportedly a stonemason. From the age of 14, young Brynhild worked on neighboring farms, herding cattle and saving money, driven by a desire to journey to America. Like many Norwegians of her time, she sought opportunities beyond the difficult living conditions of her homeland, eventually immigrating to the United States in 1881 at the age of 21. Her stated goal was the pursuit of wealth. Upon arrival, processed through Castle Garden in New York, she made a significant, perhaps symbolic change. Brynhild Paulstatter Sturseth became Belle Peterson. This shedding of her Norwegian name, Brynhild, a name resonant with powerful female figures from Norse mythology and meaning battle armor, in favor of the simpler, more American Belle, marked more than just assimilation. It represented a deliberate severing of ties with her past, the first step in constructing a new identity that would ultimately mask a horrifying capacity for deception and violence. It was a conscious choice to craft a facade, distancing herself from her origins as she embarked on her pursuit of the American dream, albeit through increasingly sinister means. She traveled to Chicago, joining her sister Nellie, who had emigrated earlier. There, Belle worked initially as a domestic servant, grueling work that likely fueled her ambition for greater wealth. As her sister later remarked, Belle was crazy for money. She may have also worked briefly in a butcher's shop, a job that perhaps hinted at the physical strength she possessed, described as standing at least 5'7" inches and weighing around 200 pounds or more. In 1884, Belle married Mads Ditlev Anton Sørensen, a fellow Norwegian immigrant. The couple opened a confectionery store, but their early ventures were marked by suspicious misfortune. Both their store and later their home mysteriously burned down, each incident conveniently resulting in insurance payouts. The pattern of profitable tragedy soon extended to human life. 2 infants in Belle's care, possibly foster children named Caroline, d. 1896, and Alex, 1898, died from what was diagnosed as acute colitis, symptoms consistent with poisoning. Neighbors reportedly gossiped, noting Belle never appeared pregnant, yet she had insured both children and collected the payouts after their deaths. The calculated nature of these events culminated in the death of Mads Sørensen himself on July 30, 1900. Belle claimed he died of heart failure or cerebral hemorrhage after she gave him quinine powder for a headache. Suspiciously, his death occurred on the single day that two of his life insurance policies, one expiring, one newly effective, overlapped. Belle collected on both, netting a substantial sum, reported as between $5,000 and $8,000. Mads's family demanded an inquiry, but no charges were filed. The sequence in Chicago reveals a chilling progression. It wasn't merely a string of bad luck. It was a methodical escalation from suspected arson for insurance money to the calculated murder of dependents and finally her spouse, all for financial enrichment. Chicago served as Belle's criminal apprenticeship, where she honed her deadly craft, discovered she could evade suspicion, and cemented profit through death as her driving motive. The overlapping insurance policies strongly suggest Mads's death was no accident, but a premeditated murder marking the completion of her Chicago operations. With neighbors growing wary, Belle took her insurance windfall and her remaining children, seeking a new, more isolated stage for her activities. The Laporte widow and her deadly farm. In November 1901, using the substantial insurance money from Mads Sorensen's death, Belle Gunness relocated to Laporte, Indiana. She purchased a 40-plus acre pig farm on McClung Road, a property that would soon earn its infamous Murder Farm moniker. She arrived with 3 children, Myrtle and Lucy Sorensen, and a foster daughter, Jenny Olson. The move to a rural farm was a strategic masterstroke. It offered crucial advantages over the increasingly suspicious atmosphere of Chicago. The isolation shielded her activities from prying eyes, the ample acreage provided seemingly limitless space for disposing of bodies, and the persona of a hard-working widow lent her a veneer of respectability. The farm wasn't just a new home. It was an essential instrument, perfectly suited for the industrial scale of murder she was about to undertake. Soon after settling in, Belle found her next husband. On April 1, 1902, she married Peter Gunness, a local hog farmer and butcher, also a Norwegian immigrant and recent widower with 2 young daughters. Tragedy struck almost immediately. Within a week of the wedding, while Peter was away, his infant daughter died under Belle's care of unknown causes. Peter himself met his end just 8 months later, in December 1902. Belle claimed a heavy meat or sausage grinder had accidentally fallen from a high shelf, striking him on the head and killing him. Some accounts add he was also scalded. The district coroner suspected murder and convened a jury, but ultimately nothing came of it. Belle, now twice widowed under suspicious circumstances, collected another $3,000 in insurance money. Around this time, her foster daughter Jenny Olson also vanished. Belle claimed she'd sent Jenny to a finishing school in Los Angeles, but the girl was never heard from again. Her body would later be unearthed from a shallow grave on the farm. Jenny had reportedly confided in a friend that she believed Belle had murdered Peter. With Peter gone, Belle embarked on her most infamous enterprise. She began placing advertisements in the matrimonial columns of Midwestern newspapers, particularly those serving the Norwegian-American community. One such ad read, "Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with view of joining fortunes." A key requirement was that suitors must come to the farm in person, bringing with them substantial cash, often their entire life savings, ostensibly to prove their seriousness or contribute to the partnership. This targeting of fellow Norwegian immigrants was a calculated exploitation of community and trust. These men, often lonely, far from their original homes, and seeking companionship with someone who shared their background, were uniquely vulnerable. Belle's shared heritage likely fostered a false sense of security, making her promises of a shared future with a seemingly prosperous widow irresistible. It was a betrayal not just of individuals, but of the immigrant network she infiltrated. A steady stream of hopeful men arrived at the LaPorte farm. Few were ever seen again. Known victims lured through these ads included John Moe from Minnesota, Henry Gerholt from Wisconsin, Ole B. Budsberg, Olaf Svenherud, Olaf Lindblom, Andrew Helgeline from South Dakota, John Moo, and Thomas Lindboe. Belle's methods were brutal and efficient. Victims were often treated to a meal, their coffee laced with strychnine poison. Once incapacitated, she would finish the job, frequently bludgeoning them with an axe or meat cleaver. She then dismembered the bodies, burying the remains in burlap sacks in the hog pen or in pits dug around the property, sometimes passed off as holes for garbage. Gruesome local legends even arose, suggesting she fed remains to her pigs or served them as sausage to unsuspecting guests. For years, Belle Gunness operated her murder farm with impunity, but by early 1908, the foundations of her deadly enterprise began to crack. The catalyst for her downfall was one of her final victims, Andrew Helgelien, a Norwegian farmer from Aberdeen, South Dakota. Lured by Belle's correspondence, Helgelien arrived at the Laporte farm in January 1908. After a couple of weeks, he had money transferred from his South Dakota bank account. Belle insisted on taking the entire sum in cash, despite advice to keep some in the bank for safety. The next day, Andrew Helgelien vanished. Unlike previous victims whose disappearances went largely unnoticed or uninvestigated, Andrew had a persistent brother, Asle Helgelien. Concerned when Andrew failed to return home, Asle found Belle's letters among his brother's belongings. He began writing to Belle and the Laporte Bank, inquiring about Andrew's whereabouts. Belle claimed Andrew had left, but Asle's continued inquiries and his stated intention to come to Laporte himself to investigate put immense pressure on Belle. Her carefully constructed world was threatening to collapse. Adding to the instability was Ray Lamphere. Hired in August 1907, Lamphere served as Belle's farmhand and became her lover, likely privy to at least some of her dark secrets. Lamphere grew intensely jealous of Andrew Helgelien during his visit. In February 1908, perhaps seeing him as a liability due to his jealousy and potential knowledge, Belle fired Lamphere, allegedly for trespassing. Lamphere's role was complex. He was likely a pawn in Belle's game, used for labor and perhaps affection, then discarded when he became inconvenient or potentially dangerous. Belle then strategically began to set him up as a future scapegoat. She hired a new farmhand, Joe Maxon, and started publicly voicing fears that Lamphere, bitter over his dismissal and spurned affections, was threatening to burn down her house with her and her children inside. This narrative conveniently painted Lamphere as a menacing figure, just as Asle Helgelien's pressure intensified. In a final ominous step, Belle visited her attorney on April 27, 1908, to make out her last will and testament. The stage was set for the farm's final, fiery act. Fire, discovery, and a botched investigation. In the pre-dawn hours of April 28, 1908, the Gunness farmhouse erupted in flames. The new hired hand, Joe Maxon, awoke around 4 a.m. to the smell of smoke engulfing his upstairs room. He frantically tried to wake Belle and her children, Myrtle, 11, Lucy, 9, and Philip, 5, shouting their names, but received no answer. Barely escaping with his own life, Maxon rushed to Laporte to summon the fire department. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was collapsing into the basement. That afternoon, sifting through the smoldering ruins, investigators made a grim discovery in the cellar. The charred bodies of 3 children, huddled together with the headless corpse of an adult woman. Initially, it was assumed the woman was Belle Gunness, tragically overcome by the fire while trying to save her children. This assumption rapidly disintegrated with the arrival of Asle Helgelien from South Dakota, still determined to find his missing brother, Andrew. Unconvinced by the fire scene, Helgelien persuaded Joe Maxon to help him dig in a soft patch of ground near the hog pen, an area Maxon recalled using with Belle to bury garbage. Their shovels soon struck a burlap sack containing the dismembered body of Andrew Helgelien. This horrific discovery transformed the investigation. LaPorte County Sheriff Albert Smutzer ordered a systematic excavation of the farm grounds. Over the next several days, a gruesome panorama unfolded as search crews unearthed numerous bodies and body parts from shallow graves scattered across the property, particularly in the hog pen and refuse pits. Initial reports cited at least 11 to 13 bodies, including those identified as Jenny Olson and Ola Budsberg, but the true number remained uncertain, with estimates eventually climbing past 40. The farm became a macabre tourist attraction. Thousands flocked from across the country to witness the exhumations, trampling over potential evidence and turning the crime scene into a carnival-like spectacle. This chaos, combined with the rudimentary forensic techniques of the era, severely hampered the investigation. The failure to secure the scene, the public display of remains, and the inability to accurately count or identify all the victims created critical gaps in the factual record. These investigative shortcomings allowed speculation, rumor, and legend to take root, contributing significantly to the mystery that still surrounds Belle Gunness today. Suspicion quickly fell on the disgruntled former handyman, Ray Lamphere. Given Belle's earlier accusations and his known animosity towards her, he was arrested in May 1908 and charged with arson and the murders of Belle and her children. The prosecution argued Lamphere acted out of jealousy over Belle's relationships with other men. At his trial in November 1908, Lamphere was found guilty of arson but significantly acquitted of murder. The lack of a head on the adult female corpse made proving it was Belle, and thus proving Lamphere murdered her, impossible for the prosecution. Lamphere died in prison from tuberculosis about a year later, in 1909. However, before his death, he allegedly made a detailed confession. He claimed Belle had meticulously planned the entire event. Facing exposure from Asla Helgelian, she murdered her own children along with an unidentified woman brought to the farm to serve as a body double. Belle then had Lamphere set the house ablaze while she waited nearby, having already withdrawn most of her money from local banks. After the fire was underway, she fled town. Lamphere also admitted to helping Belle bury some of her previous victims. Whether his confession was entirely truthful or partly self-serving remains debated, but it provided a compelling narrative for Belle's escape and became central to the enduring legend. Vanished into legend, the unsolved fate of Belle Gunness. The question of whether Belle Gunness died in the 1908 fire or engineered a cunning escape hinges on the identity of the headless corpse found in the cellar. The evidence remains deeply conflicted, fueling a century of debate. Arguments supporting the theory that Belle died in the fire point primarily to the discovery of dental work, a bridge containing human teeth, porcelain teeth, and gold crowns, amidst the debris weeks after the fire. Belle's own dentist identified the bridge work as one he had made for her. Based largely on this, the coroner officially declared Belle Gunness dead. The presence of her children's bodies also seemed to support her demise in the fire. However, compelling evidence contradicts this conclusion. The most significant issue was the size discrepancy. Numerous accounts, including testimony from the doctor who performed the postmortem and records from her dressmaker, described Belle as a large, strong woman, standing around 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing between 200 and 280 pounds. Yet, the headless corpse recovered from the ashes was measured as being considerably smaller, perhaps 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighing only around 150 pounds. Furthermore, the fact that the body was missing its head prevented positive facial identification and seemed suspiciously convenient. Ray Lamphere's detailed deathbed confession about Belle planting a body double adds significant weight to the escape theory. Many believed Belle could have easily planted the dental bridge in the ruins to mislead investigators, especially given her documented history of elaborate deception in her preparations just before the fire, making a will, buying kerosene. Lamphere's confession painted a picture of a calculated escape. Belle, possibly with his help, traveled to Chicago before the fire to procure a suitable female corpse to plant in the house. This narrative fueled decades of speculation and alleged sightings. Reports placed Belle all over the country, from Chicago to Mississippi to California. The most compelling potential sighting involved a woman named Esther Carlson, arrested in Los Angeles in 1931 for poisoning a man for his money, a method consistent with Belle's. Carlson bore a physical resemblance to Belle, was roughly the same age, and mysteriously lacked any documented history before 1908. Several people who had known Belle identified Carlson as the fugitive killer after seeing her photograph in newspapers. However, Carlson died of tuberculosis while awaiting trial, preventing definitive confirmation. Later research suggested conflicting timelines, casting doubt on the Carlson theory, though it remains a popular element of the Gunness legend. A century after the fire, modern science attempted to settle the question. In 2008, a team from the University of Indianapolis, led by forensic anthropologist Stephen Nawrocki and graduate student and former prosecutor Andrea Simmons, exhumed the grave purported to hold Belle Gunness's remains at Forest Home Cemetery near Chicago. Their goal was to extract DNA from the bones and compare it to DNA potentially recoverable from saliva on envelopes from letters Belle had sent to Andrew Helgelian. The exhumation yielded a surprise. The casket contained not only the partial remains of an adult woman, but also the bones of 2 children, further highlighting the chaos of the original investigation. Despite the application of advanced forensic techniques, the DNA samples from both the remains and the envelopes proved too degraded by time to yield conclusive results. Plans to potentially test against the remains of Belle's sister, buried in California, were considered but apparently not completed. The Belle Gunness case thus stands as a stark reminder of the limits of science in unraveling historical mysteries, especially when hampered by contaminated crime scenes and the passage of time. The inconclusive DNA results meant the central question remained unanswered, ensuring Belle Gunness would continue to exist in the space between documented history and chilling folklore, her true fate lost to time. Conclusion: Hell's Belle, a legacy of horror. Belle Gunness carved a uniquely terrifying niche in the annals of American crime. Driven by insatiable greed and demonstrating a chilling lack of empathy, she transformed herself from a Norwegian immigrant seeking fortune into one of history's most prolific female serial killers. Her methods were marked by calculated cruelty, the intimate betrayal of marriage and family, the exploitation of immigrant vulnerability through Lonely Hearts ads, and the brutal efficiency of poison, bludgeoning, and dismemberment, followed by burial on her infamous Indiana murder farm. The sheer scale of her crimes, potentially claiming over 40 lives, remains staggering. Yet, the horror of her confirmed actions is perpetually overshadowed by the fundamental, unanswered question: did Hell's Belle meet her end in the inferno of April 1908, or did she successfully stage her death and vanish, cheating justice and melting into anonymity? Despite Lampier's confession, decades of reported sightings, the tantalizing Esther Carlson lead, and even the intervention of modern forensic science, her ultimate fate remains stubbornly unconfirmed. This enduring ambiguity has cemented Belle Gunness's legacy. She is more than just a historical case study. She has become a figure of American folklore, a phantom haunting the public imagination. Her story continues to captivate and horrify over a century later, spawning books, documentaries, music, museum exhibits, and ongoing fascination within true crime communities and beyond. Belle Gunness taps into primal fears: the danger lurking beneath a veneer of normalcy, the corruption of the domestic sphere, the ultimate betrayal of trust, and the chilling possibility that monstrous evil can not only exist but perhaps even escape, leaving behind only questions, bodies, and a legend written in blood.